Caesar. For Caesar.
Hello, everybody. As you've heard, I'm Caesar, and I'm here to talk about Django-nonrel. First of all, what is Django-nonrel? Django-nonrel itself is a fork of Django. It's a fork of Django that allows us to run non-relational databases against Django, and it makes some minor changes. Like one of the biggest impact changes for us is that Django assumes that every automatic ID, primary key on MySQL, is an integer, and that doesn't work on almost all non-relational databases. What does it introduce? It introduces new backends for Django. Right now, the two that are stable and working are MongoDB and App Engine. As of today, someone has volunteered, or hopefully will finish, a Cassandra backend for Django-nonrel. There's also the options of Membase, DynamoDB, all of them. And if actually you want to write a backend for Django non-relational, it's one of the greatest ways to get into the project. It's a lot of work, but it's not difficult from a conceptual standpoint. Django-nonrel also introduces new model fields, which I'll go into later. Some things you might expect, lists and whatnot. So, why would you use Django-nonrel? One of the biggest benefits is that you no longer have set schemas. If you have to deal with South or Nash Vegas, you don't have to do that in non-relational databases. You can do things like if your code can handle it, you can have one model with 5 different fields on it, and the next model with 2 extra fields, and one after that with 3 fields. And your database is not going to throw a fit at you. Like I said, if your code can handle it, if you do .get and return none and handle it, you're fine. A lot of people use Django non-relational for ease of porting. They start writing an application on Google App Engine, and until Google recently released their Cloud SQL, App Engine only had, I believe, 0.96 version of Django. So a lot of people come to the Django-nonrel project to run updated Django on Google App Engine. And if at some point you decide Google App Engine is charging you too much, you can move off of Google App Engine and onto your like EC2 with MongoDB. In the future, with things like Cassandra and whatnot, you easily move your code back and forth between them. And why is that? Because you get to use the Django ORM. Like say you're using MongoDB. The options are, I think, PyMongo directly, Mongo Engine. But in the case of using Django-nonrel, you are using the ORM and the benefits of it. And that's also the ease of porting. If you have a third-party app you want to run, instead of ripping out the internals of the Django ORM and putting in Mongo Engine or PyMongo or the actual App Engine API, you get to make some minor changes to many fields and run it on your non-relational system. Django rocks. This is a big reason. A lot of people, when going to non-relational databases, will just use a very plain Python framework of some sort because they lose a lot of the benefits of Django when you lose the ORM. Model forms don't work correctly anymore. The admin doesn't work. With Django-nonrel, those work. So, exactly how is non-rel different from Django? There is no many field in Django-nonrel. That's a relation that uses joins, and right now it is not supported, which is why I say yet. I am the camp that uses non-rel because of its flexibility, not necessarily for speed or big data, and I would like to see in the future Django-nonrel support many-to-many in the sense that it's not going to be as fast as other things. But the best example is, and you've all run into it, you have a third-party app that's going to be used by a small bit of the users on your site, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be fast, so many-to-many emulation is good. And so that's one of the things I'm pushing for. These are the big pluses that you get in addition to the Django ORM as part of it on Django-nonrel. List field, set field, and dict field. I'll go into each of those in a bit. Embedded model field. You can have an instance of your model, and inside that have other instances of models. Say you have a blog post. You can have all the comments to that blog post as submodels to your comment model. Okay. So how would you install it if you wanted to use Django-nonrel? We've recently moved the entire project to GitHub. Before, it was kind of a pain because it was spread out between Bitbucket and GitHub, but now it's on GitHub and you can install it directly from there. We use Git flow, so our master branch is stable, which is why we recommend installing it using pip from GitHub. So if you install it, you first install Django-nonrel. The most important thing is this overwrites Django. It is a fork of Django of 1.3. There's work going on version 1.4. So when you install this, make sure you know it overwrites Django itself. So if you're custom patch of Django, it overwrites it. That is a mistake a lot of people make. Next, you'd want to install Django Toolbox. Because nonrel itself is just patches against Django, Django Toolbox includes all the fields: list field, set field, dict field, embedded model field, and other helpers along with that. The backend of your choice. Now, that's either MongoDB right now or App Engine. App Engine includes other extras on top of Django Toolbox or Django-nonrel. I think it adds management commands to deal with some instances and pass flags back and forth to App Engine. There's other optional components. Django DB Indexer does provide for some level of join support, and there's also, when you use the Django RM, you can add date, underscore month, and whatnot, and that gives support for that under some cases. And the nonrel permissions backend, if you want to use Django permissions and have it accessible in the admin, then you're going to want to use nonrel permissions backend. Setup, once you've installed it, is exceptionally simple. It's just a database. You have multi-database support in Django, and pick one of them as App Engine or Django MongoDB Engine and use it. In the case you're using MongoDB Engine, and actually probably now with when Cloud SQL support comes in, you can use multiple databases. This is a use case a lot of people do. They will have a majority of their application inside Postgres or MySQL and have another database inside Mongo where it fits, where it goes fast. Mongo is faster in that situation. So the special fields I talked about. List field is the one people use a lot. The best thing about list field, it works just like Python lists. You get Python lists out of the database, you put Python lists into the database. The one downside with the list field, set field, and dict field is that right now it's not automatically editable in the Django admin, but that's something we're going to work on. It's never going to be fully supported in the Django admin, mostly because you can set a dict field, list field, set field, and put anything you want in it. So the UI is a little bit difficult when one item's a string, one item's an integer, one item's a foreign key. And that's one of the big uses of list field. A lot of people will replace their many-to-many fields with lists of foreign keys. Ditto, set field, dict field. Sets go in, sets come out. Dictionaries go in, dictionaries come out. Embedded model field. I talked about this earlier. Allows you to embed a model. And in this case, you see we have an employee model and a company model. So you pull that company record, and inside that company record has all the employee records. Most of the time, this is a good idea, depending how many employees you have and how the database backend handles it. I think the MongoDB backend won't pull those sub-records until you actually query on it. It's a lazy querying against it. So that's the actual benefit of Django-nonrel. It's not huge different from Django, and that's the point. So there's a lot of changes going on with nonrel, and I'm going to tell you about those. All Buttons Pressed was a group of students at a university, and Django-nonrel was their thesis project. course, I think at this point they've graduated university, they moved on their own startup, so they're no longer head of the project. What happened is, I think right now it's 6 or 7 people raised their hand and said, we'll help. And there's still the original writer of the MongoDB back engine is there. There's still some original people with it. Sorry. So I said the whole new team was the commit bit, including me. Yay. If you're interested, create an IRC channel, Django-nonrel and Freenode. There's 10 or 11 of us hanging out in there. And one thing I preface it with is most people are in Europe. So if you ask a question, you might have to wait a little bit. But we do answer. So don't come in and say hi and then disappear. So it's most likely someone's going to answer you at night, which if you're hacking on a side project, that's a good thing. So one of our main goals in the project in the future, and it's already on the way, is to push the non-rel patches into Django core. We would like Django-nonrel to be the backends, the toolbox, and not the actual fork of Django. The tickets for Django-nonrel are in the Django ticket tracker currently. You know, the one that changes auto ID is to no longer assume that they're an integer and whatnot. All that's left to do with them is to attach tests and documentation with it, and that's one thing I'm personally going to tackle in the near future. We are totally revamping the documentation. The documentation used to be scattered. The documentation was good once you got it all in one place, but we're putting all the documentation that's relevant to MongoDB in one place, relevant to non-rel in one place. Refactoring Mongo Engine and Django Toolbox components is one thing we're working on. So if you're really good at refactoring, we'd really love you to come aboard. It can, I mean, some of the backend can get pretty advanced. You're dealing with non-relational, you're dealing with patching into Django's ORM, which assumes SQL, very much to the point that things are called SQL compiler. Things assume SQL. So if you're interested in Django-nonrel, what can you do? Use it in your projects. I'm currently using Django-nonrel in a project I'm writing for the Institute Design called Django LMS, a learning management system. And very much after Django-nonrel was installed and working, I haven't, other than not being able to use many-to-many fields and using the other fields, haven't had to deal with much issues in regards to using non-rel. Using an application against non-rel is a great way to help us test new things, to learn the basics of the project. And after you write something against non-rel, we would love you to contribute. If you find a bug or a feature, we would love contributors right now. If you've ever wanted to get involved with an open source project, this is very much the time to do so, because the barrier to entry to work on Django-nonrel is very low. We're on GitHub, it's easy, write something up, give us a pull request, we'll look at it, and if it's good, we'll write it. So if you've ever wanted to join an open source community and had trouble getting in because everyone is trying to commit to it, now's a great time. On those lines, write tests if you want to contribute. That's an easy one. If you find a bug, write a test against it, fix the bug, we're in good shape. Documentation. If you decide to install Django-nonrel and it's not as simple as it could be for you, you learn some things, you have pull requests against the documentation, we would love that. Just like the Django project, we want things to be as documented as possible. Join our discussion group. It's a Google group. It's Django-nonrelational at googlegroups.com, Django-nonrelational at googlegroups.com, and we'd love it. Write more code along these lines. So what am I doing? I spoke before, I'm doing Django LMS, Learning Management System. If anyone's interested, soon I'm going to be writing up the wiki on GitHub and be looking for contributors. If you work in an academic institution and have to deal with Moodle or was it Sakai or whatever MIT's is, it's Java platform, and would like something in Django, that'd be great. I'm a huge fan of learning management systems on top of frameworks, because every institution is different, every institution has different needs. I'm also working on extending foreign keys to work in list fields intuitively. Currently, when you push foreign keys in the list fields, you have to push the IDs of the keys in and out. It gets stored in the backend, but I would like to be able to query against them with the actual model instance, and it's really mostly because I'm nitpicky. And actually that is everything I wanted to say about non-rel, and I'd like to take questions because last time I did this, there was a lot of questions, so I want to give plenty of time.
So Django-nonrel is a fork of Django, so you install this instead of Django?
Yes.
Why is that?
Mostly because I was speaking earlier, the auto ID assumes integer. Sometimes it can be hard to get these things into Django, and the team that originally started all buttons pressed wanted to get going on it, so it became a fork of Django. We don't like that it's a fork of Django right now. We want those pushed into Django itself. And there's been plenty of good reception from the Django community, from the BDFL, Adrian and Jason, not Jason, Jacob. So it's looking very bright that there's not going to be a fork in the future. I think the fork is a total of 3 or 4 patches, and none of them are more than 5 or 6 lines of changes. So it's really small. It just needs to be documented and tested.
So you couldn't do an app?
Yeah, because it has patch into the ORM.
I guess you do a lot more copy code into the app.
Yeah, and you could monkey patch into it, but it would be exceptionally annoying. So, and Django has stable releases, so you can pull 1.3, add the minor patches to it, and make sure the security patches are up to date, and you're fine as far as a fork goes. And since most people install things using pip and can install from a Git repo, it's not that difficult for people. Any other questions?
Well, that's along the lines of keeping it up to date and answered. So to keep up to date with Django, is that what you guys do, or do you wait
Django
for
stable.
release?
Yeah. At 1.3 dot whatever the latest security release is, that's what the patch is against. Now, because there's a separation of Django-nonrel and Django Toolbox, which includes all the fields and whatnot, Django Toolbox isn't always, it's always going to work with whatever Django-nonrel is. But Django Toolbox gets updated more than Django-nonrel just because Django itself doesn't get updated as much.
Does it support multi-database support, maybe non-rel with rel?
Yes. It's one of the things I talked about earlier, and one of the big use cases is a lot of people will use it alongside relational databases because they have, look at the case of Discuss, where it's tons and tons and tons of comments, and something like MongoDB, where it has a really quick index and can really quickly pull things out. You might have your users in a relational database that can relate to some things, and your comments themselves, since I think they're only 2 levels deep, inside a document. So when you load up this article on this page, it just pulls up one document from non-relational with documents in it, and it's really quick. That's a big use case for a lot of people. Any other questions?
Yeah, you said the databases are not automatically editable in admin. What do you have to do?
Certain fields aren't editable in the admin. List field is not editable in the admin. Pretty much the new fields aren't automatically editable in the admin. Like, the list field is not automatically editable because you don't know what's inside a list field. So the UI is kind of difficult because it doesn't have to be a list of all the same things. Like, it doesn't have to be a list of strings or a list of integers. It can be same as a Python list, anything. So one's.
But is there something you can do to use the admin?
Oh yeah, I mean, in Django LMS, you look at it, there's examples of it. Pretty much just use your regular admin customization. Make your admin form and tell it this is what this is. We're trying to become a mentor on Google Summer of Code, and we'll see what happens with that. And one of the things is to try and build some way to automatically generate widgets and UI elements in the admin for list fields and embedded model fields. I think embedded model fields probably most likely to happen first because it's a lot less difficult to tackle. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Who else is using it?
Who else is using it? There's pretty much the majority of the users, 2/3 of the users, from my estimation, are using it on App Engine. I don't think there's any real big names using it right now, no. But a lot of people who wanted App Engine and wanted Django have been using Django-nonrel. A lot of it because of the extra things it supports on top of just using Django and the big table API on App Engine, the management commands and whatnot. Now, right now, there's not any big names using it that I know of. There might be, and just, we haven't chased after them to find out if they are.
Well, you mentioned Discuss. Are they using it?
No, I don't. I don't know. I don't think so. No. That's one use case possibly, but my guess is they're way beyond even something like Django-nonrel at their size. Any other questions? All right. Feel free to contact me. Sorry, this doesn't go back to the beginning. Anyhow. So yeah, there's my information. Feel free to contact me. I said it's at the point of an open source project where it's easy to become a contributor. It's easy to push things into it. So thank you.
Thanks.